All right, my friends, we are going to learn about invertebrates during this lecture series. First thing that you need to know, and that most of you have told me in class, is that an invertebrate is an organism without a backbone. That is super important for you to know. They are in kingdom Animalia, and we will be in this kingdom until we start plants. And there's 30 different phyla that this unit, I guess, covers. And we're only going to hit a few of them, but there's a lot of organisms in this group. It's actually 98% of the Earth's animal species are invertebrates. As far as size, they're generally smaller than vertebrates and more slow-moving. Highlight that there's no backbone. To know that they do not have cell walls because they are not plants, and they generally reproduce sexually. As far as types of symmetry, we've also gone over these. I would highlight this whole slide. Radial symmetry is like a pizza, like a wheel, like a cupcake, like any sort of circular object that you can cut through the middle any way and have equal parts. And that would be the top two diagrams up in your picture. Bilateral, remember, means two sides. That would be right and left halves if you split it down the middle. Generally, they have a front and a back end as well, like us. So these two right down here would have bilateral symmetry. Germ layers are the tissues that animals develop from. You develop from something called a blastula when you're in the uterus. And then these different layers of that blastula develop into the different portions of you. So the ectoderm, ecto meaning outside, mesoderm, meso meaning middle, and endo means inside. Diploblasts are animals that develop from only two germ layers, and that are the ones that have radial symmetry, so generally the cnidarians. I would highlight di and two. Triploblasts are animals with all three germ layers, and that is all other animals besides sponges and cnidarians. These guys usually have bilateral symmetry, and I would highlight 3 and tri. These layers develop into many different things. The ectoderm is a lot of our outside stuff, so our nervous system, which is on the inside, but other than that, nails, hair, scales. The integument is our skin, so this will develop into the top layer of our skin as well, which is called the epidermis. The mesoderm develops into kind of the stuff that cushions all of our internal organs. Then the endoderm develops into the lining, so the inside of those internal organs. Next thing we're going to talk about is anatomical terms, or terms dealing with the human body and or other organisms. Superior and inferior mean above and below. So the nose is superior or above the mouth. Abdomen is inferior or below the chest. So it's kind of like saying your boss is your superior. They're kind of above you in the chain of command. Anterior and posterior means front and back. The heart is anterior or more towards the front than the spinal cord. Medial and lateral, I'd like you to go ahead and circle the M in medial and the M in midline. Medial means more towards the midline, so if you're splitting yourself right through the nose. And lateral means more towards the side or outside the midline. Cephalid and caudal are used for animals. This means toward or away from the head. Cephalid means toward the head, which would be the same as superior in us. Caudal means towards the tail, which would be like inferior to us. Distal and proximal are used for appendages. So they would be used for our hands and our arms and legs. And it means farther and closer to the trunk. Distal is farther and farther away from the trunk. Proximal is closer and closer to the trunk. So the knee is closer to the trunk, which is the midsection of your body, than the toes are. Dorsal ventral would be only used for animals as well. Same as anterior, posterior in us. Dorsal, like a dorsal fin, means the back of the organism. Ventral is like the belly of the organism. Superficial means more towards the surface, Deep means away from the surface. So pause the video, go ahead and try these, and then we will go over the answers. To check these, the wrist is proximal to the hand, but distal to the shoulder. The trachea is anterior to the spine. The brain is superior to the spinal cord, and the tip of the nose is medial to the cheekbones. I can cut a person in lots of different ways depending on how I need to slice them to see the inside of them. So we're going to go over these real quick. The frontal or coronal means I'm going to split him through the head, and it's going to be a front side with the face and a back side. Sagittal will be right through the nose, and it would be right and left halves. And horizontal would be right through the stomach. So that would be superior or top and bottom parts. As far as body cavities, acoelomate means without. That prefix a means without. So this is all kind of tissue and fluid. There's no like blank space. Pseudo means it's divided into cavities, but like if there was liquid or something in here, like it could get all around this area. And then coelomate, which is what we have, it's actually divided into sections. Like liquid from this area couldn't get to liquid from this area. And I would highlight acoelomate. These are the different phyla that we are going to talk about. So you probably want to pause the video to get these written down really quickly. The first one is phylum Porifera. That comes from the Latin words porus and fere, which means to bear pores. These guys are super simplistic. They have no definite symmetry. Their body is multicellular, but there's very few tissues. There's no organs, no true body cavity. They are all sessile, which means non-modal, which means non-moving, unless they're picked up by a current. They can reproduce sexually or asexually. They have no nervous system. They live in mostly marine or seawater, and they are filter feeders. So I want you to think of the filter you might have on your faucet that pulls out the bad stuff. These guys would filter and they would pull out their food. Then they often have a skeleton made of spicules. Choanocytes are also called collar cells, and they kind of are little tails that help the water move through the sponge. Penocytes, they cover the epidermis, and they also help control the water that goes in and out. In-current, X-current, bringing water in. X means going out. X-current pore is also called the osculum. Mesohyl, also called mesenchyme, is kind of what the tissue or the body of the sponge is made of. And then spicule is what the actual structure of the skeleton is made of. So here you see a diagram of the kind of outside and inside. This is the osculum up here. I would make sure I know that. These little pores here are called in-current pores, and these little tail things are collar cells that help to move the water around. These guys reproduce sexually and asexually. They do have internal fertilization, which means sperm is carried to another organism and it's fertilized inside the other organism. Asexually is by budding, little pieces drop off onto the ocean floor. And then what a gemula is kind of a protective coating that keeps it safe until conditions are right for it to grow into a sponge. And I would highlight this whole slide. These show you some cool examples of different porifera. I think this guy's pretty cool. I also think the iridescent one kind of means it sparkles a little bit. And this gives you a more simplistic version of the diagram. Then you have the internal. Next phylum we're going to talk about is Cnidarian. That comes from the Latin word cnide, which means nettle or stinging. They are radially symmetrical, which means they have that circle body shape. Get a little bit more complex with some tissues, some organelles. Body does have an internal cavity. Remember, sponges didn't. They have two different forms. They have a medusa, which is what you normally think of, kind of the bag, grocery bag jellyfish, and a polyp, which looks a lot like a sea anemone. Reproduction can be both ways, asexual in the polyp or sexual in the medusa. And now they have a simple nervous system. Again, mostly marine. They do mostly feed on other organisms, and they might have a minimal skeleton of chitin or calcium carbonate. The body plan of cnidarians is a U shape, either up or down, with a mouth surrounded by tentacles and no anus. So the opening of the mouth is also the waist opening. They have two forms. They have a polyp form that is sessile and a free-living form called the medusa. And this is what they both look like. This right here is the polyp. The mouth is here on the top, surrounded by tentacles. This is the medusa. The mouth is here, surrounded by tentacles. And they are both in kind of a U shape. On the end of the tentacles, also all over the body, what actually stings you when you get stung by a jellyfish are something called cnidocysts that contain nematocysts. The gastrovascular cavity is where food is brought into, and these guys are diploblastic. Remember, that means two tissue layers. I would highlight the first two bullets. These guys reproduce a couple different ways, asexually through budding and sexually during the medusa stage. And these are a couple different pictures. These guys here are called thimble jellies, and they are literally the size of like part of your thumb. You have giant anemone and some elegant anemone that are also in this phylum. Phylum Platyhelminthes is Latin for platy, which means flat, helminthes, which means worms. They are now bilaterally symmetrical, so we're getting more and more complex. They have 3 layers of tissues with organs. They possess something called a blind gut, has a mouth but no anus. Their excretory organs are called protonephridial, so that's why it does not have to have an anus. They have longitudinal fibers rather than a net, which is a little more complex. Dorso-ventrally flattened, which means they look like a pancake. They are hermaphrodites, just like the worms we've talked about. And they can occur in lots of major habitats, including parasites. This word right here means that nerve tissue central or congregates at one end of the body. The word is cephalization. We have cephalization. These guys have distinct dorsal and ventral sides, so a back and a belly. And then they have something called parenchyma that serves as like a storage reservoir or kind of cushioning for internal organs. This right here is an eye spot, and it can detect changes in the amount of light in the environment, kind of like when you close your eyes and then move your hand in front of it, or someone walks in front of you when you're kind of trying to sleep. They cannot detect color, shape, anything like that. Flame cells are specialized cells to remove water from the body, and I would highlight both of those. And this right here would be the eye spot to detect shadows and light. You notice the mouth is down here towards the bottom of the body. They have several different classes. I would highlight that class Cestoda is your tapeworms. And then Monogenea, these are ectoparasites, ecto meaning outside. And we will start the next lecture with phylum Nematoda.